Hello, this is Dr. Kerry Monsess, Superintendent of the Raymore-Peculiar School District. This presentation is designed to share information about Ray-Pec's long-range facility planning process. At the end of this presentation, you'll be given the opportunity to provide input through a survey. I appreciate your time in reviewing this information. This planning process has been going throughout the course of this school year. We began back in the fall by looking at some of the needs in the district, collecting data such as capacity of the buildings and demographer enrollment projections, looked at different options that we could consider moving forward, and now we're in the process of gathering feedback from our community to identify which of those different options might be the best suited for us as a district as we move forward. We've had a wide range of staff members, board members, and planning and design specialists help us throughout this process. Our current district is aligned in grade spans with early childhood at Shull Elementary, K-5 schools. There are 7 total elementary schools across the district. We have 2 6-8 middle schools, and then our high school campus includes the main high school building as well as the academy building for the alternative program. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen some capacity levels by grade level and by building at each grade span. We'll define what effective and maximum capacities by grade level mean here in the next few slides. One of the tasks of the planning committee was to identify what the capacity of our current schools would be. They looked at how the building is configured, how many classrooms, how many students we allow per classroom or plan for per classroom. You'll see that there are 3 different capacity numbers on this chart. The Ray-Pec School District max capacity would take the number of classrooms times the number of students that we allow or consider appropriate for our classroom. Effective capacity is 90% of that number, because in reality you can't get every classroom to its full capacity in any given year. At 90%, some classrooms or grade levels are more full than others. You'll see at the far right hand side the DESE maximum capacity, which is what the state says we can have per classroom, which is a much higher number. For planning purposes, we're using effective capacity for our designation. Once we get to that 90% mark, you need to really have a plan for what's next. You'll see across all of our elementary schools collectively, we're at about 81% of effective capacity at this point in time. Looking at our secondary schools, first at the middle school level, you'll see that our effective capacity is about 84% at the 2 schools combined. And then at the high school level, we're at 97%. Obviously, that's the highest percentage among all of our grade spans, but I will qualify that slightly. Just consider the fact that some of our students are not on campus for the entire day. We have students who spend half a day at Summit Tech Academy, Cass Career Center, or Southland CAPS programming, and we have about 50 or 60 students at the alternative school across the campus. Collectively, though, that is still our fullest grade span at this point in time. The district contracted with a demographer to help project enrollment as we move forward into the future. The darker bars are historical numbers, and you'll see that we're around 6,300 students collectively across all the grade spans this school year. Moving forward, the demographer has projected that we will grow by approximately 800 students over the next decade. Those are collective numbers across the district, so let's break those down by grade span. Looking at the high school enrollment projections specifically, you'll see that very quickly we will be surpassing the effective capacity number for that facility and quickly then approaching the maximum capacity for that grade span. Obviously, this is an area where we need to address space in the not too distant future. You might ask, didn't we just add to the high school facility with a big addition not too many years ago? That is true. We did add a large addition there, but what that accomplished was allowing us to get all of our high school students back into one building. It didn't necessarily add to the overall capacity at the high school level, but what it did do was add additional capacity at the middle school and elementary level through our reconfiguration that followed after that project. In considering the fact that we have additional space needs at the high school, I just want to share with you that at the East Middle School campus, the district owns 120 acres in total there. The long-term plan for that campus would be that it would have a middle school and a high school facility at some future date when growth warranted it. That is still the long-term plan. The question then becomes, how do we get from where we're at right now to having a second high school, given the fact that we can't just go build a high school the same size as the one we have now and be responsible, in that both buildings would sit half empty if we were to do something like that. First of all, we probably couldn't afford to do it all at once to begin with. And secondly, then if we did something like that in a large scale, we wouldn't have funds available for other projects at the other grade levels in the near future. So the committee has identified 3 different scenarios that might allow us to transition from one high school to 2 high schools. I'll describe each one of them briefly and talk a little bit about some of the advantages or disadvantages, at least that might be perceived about each approach. One option would be to add a capstone or career and technical type center. This would be for specialized programs that might be half-day programs, similar to what you would see at, say, Summit Tech Academy. Juniors and seniors would go there for half a day and hopefully have a program that would allow them to get either college credit and or an industry credential as they come out of that program. So you might think of some of the things like capstone courses for our Project Lead the Way pathways, whether that's biomedical science, information technology, or engineering tracks. Other options that might be housed there could be something in advanced manufacturing, or perhaps even some of the construction and building trades that might be available for our students in the future. So very specialized programming, and targeted mostly for juniors and seniors, would be a smaller facility than maybe perhaps the other 2 options we're going to discuss. Another item might be a transitional approach by developing a freshman center on that East Middle School campus, one that would grow in ultimately to be a high school at some future date as growth continues throughout the district. We've had a freshman center in the past in the district until we outgrew that facility, and so this might be a transitional opportunity for us moving into a second high school. The third approach might be just to go ahead and build a second comprehensive high school just on a smaller scale. That option would allow a variety of opportunities for kids, and we're going to talk a little bit about pros and cons of each of these approaches. Going back to the CTE, one of the biggest advantages of that is it could add opportunities for more programming for our students. Some of those programming opportunities are high demand, high wage fields, and so that opportunity would be very beneficial. The challenge with that is it alleviates our space concerns probably for the shortest period of time, because those specialized programs wouldn't have huge enrollments. We're envisioning something more in the line of 200 students or something of that size that it could serve in half-day programs, morning and afternoon. Programming for this type are fairly significant cost-wise, but again, those opportunities would be tremendous opportunities for our students. The freshman center approach might be the most economical approach of these 3, in that the specialized spaces you need for a freshman center aren't quite as significant as the other 2. It would certainly alleviate our space needs if we pulled all of the freshmen out of the high school campus that we have now. For a long period of time, we would have space by having them in a separate building until such time that it needed to grow into a second high school. Some people like the idea of having freshmen in a specialized place. The other advantage of using the freshman center approach versus going straight to a second comprehensive high school is that we can continue that one high school community pride where every student ultimately becomes a Panther. Disadvantages for just the freshman center approach might be that we would have potential for limitations to some of the elective students might be able to take. We think we could overcome most of those concerns through scheduling and using traveling teachers as needed, but it would be difficult for them to have the complete offerings that our students have now in the comprehensive high school. The other disadvantage that we can see with the freshman center is that some of our students will have longer transportation times to get to that east campus from across the district, and it will add certainly one more transition back into the system if we were to have a freshman center on that campus. And then for the second comprehensive high school, it's probably going to be a slightly larger facility yet than the freshman center. it would have the opportunity to provide more kids opportunities to participate in co-curricular and extracurricular activities. When you have two basketball teams and two plays each for each school, that's more opportunities for more kids to participate in all those various activities. Certainly, a second comprehensive high school provides a long-term solution to space needs at the high school level, but it would also have a higher operational cost because of the duplication of those programs that you would need. More than likely, then, the two high schools, if we went with this approach, would be of different sizes in the short term. The existing high school would be larger, and then the second high school would be a smaller size. It would be difficult to maintain perfect equity between those two schools, but I think it could be done. And it would potentially split our community to where we have some students going to one high school, some going to the other, and we might lose a little bit of that Panther pride that we have now. So collectively, these options are just different approaches that could be taken to transition from one high school to a second high school. People have asked, is there one that you see as better than the other? And quite frankly, I think any of these three are valid approaches to make that transition. At the end of this presentation, we're going to be asking your feedback in terms of ranking these in terms of which would be the best approach. But I want to qualify that by saying that we could do some combination of these. For example, if we build a freshman center, we could still include some capstone career and tech spaces, and or if we pull the freshmen out of the existing high school building, some of that space could be repurposed for some of those capstone CTE type programs. So we do have some flexibility to mix and match here, but we're just trying to get a sense of what the best overall approach would be. At the middle school level, over the next 10 years, we are projected to have sufficient space across the two schools. So for this purpose, we are not really identifying additional space over the next decade for the middle school grade span. I will tell you, though, that there is a chance that at some point during the next 10 years, we may have to balance enrollments between those two schools, as East Middle School right now tends to be growing faster than South Middle School. At the elementary level, our projections would indicate that we have enough collective space across all 7 elementary schools for the next decade. However, when we look at it by individual schools, it's a little more challenging. This chart shows in the green bars what the current enrollment for each school is at the elementary level. The blue bar is the effective capacity, and the gold bar is the capacity projection, the enrollment projection for 5 years from now, which is halfway through this 10-year planning process. You'll see that Timber Creek Elementary on the far right will exceed their capacity within the next 5 years, and Creekmore and Eagle Glen will be approaching their effective capacity during that time. What we see then is an overall trend where the schools in the northern portion of the district are growing at a faster rate than those in the southern portion of the district. The Planning Committee has identified 2 different scenarios for addressing space needs at the elementary level. One would be just to revise attendance boundaries at some date in the future to balance enrollments among the 7 existing elementary schools. A second approach would be to build an 8th elementary school and revise attendance boundaries to balance enrollments among all 8 schools. The district does own land in the northeast part of the district for a future 8th elementary site off of Prairie Lane Road. That is in the area where we're seeing the most growth in the school district, in that northern tier of the district. In terms of perceived advantages or disadvantages for these 2 approaches, obviously if we just revise attendance boundaries with our current schools, it'd be the most economical in that we wouldn't have to build another school and add those additional operational costs. It would provide enough relief, we believe, to provide space over the next decade. But it will be more challenging to do it in this regard. We can revise attendance boundaries without a long lead time as compared to building a new school, so we can be more responsive in terms of when we need to do that. As far as building the 8th elementary school, the advantage there would be we'd provide more space over more time, so it would be a longer term solution. It will help in terms of balancing those enrollments to have all 8 schools available. And in fact, it would also help balance enrollments for the middle schools potentially because at that point we would have 4 elementary schools feeding east and 4 elementary schools feeding south. Obviously, building another elementary school increases your operational cost to operate and maintain a facility, and add some additional staff that would require to do so. The committee is also looking at other facilities that may be added to the district based on need or interest. Some of those include aquatic center, athletic fields, performing arts center, and tennis courts. I'll talk briefly about each one of those. Some districts have their own aquatic center. Right now, Ray-Pec utilizes space from High Blue Wellness Center for our swimming program. But if we had our own center, we'd have the option to add swimming to our physical education curriculum and provide more access for our swimming program to have access to a pool. One of the challenges with aquatic center is that they're fairly costly to operate. So there's higher operational costs that would come with this option potentially than any of the other options we're considering. The district does have a need for additional athletic fields. For example, South Middle School does not have its own designated field. We do a lot of field sharing across the district. So adding additional field space would provide for both physical education programming access and for our various teams that need access to fields across the district. In this case, we're not talking about a synthetic turf stadium type complex. We're just talking about additional grass fields across the district as needed. The district also has a potential need for a larger performing arts center. The one we have at the high school campus now served the building fine back in the 90s when it was built, but as we continue to grow, it's becoming undersized, obviously, for the size of the programs that we have. Our Performing Arts Center serves some very large student participation programs when you consider band, choir, and theater. So having a larger facility would certainly be of an advantage to us. Performing Arts Center has perhaps higher operational cost than an athletic field, but not as much operational cost as an aquatic center. And similar to the aquatic center, we utilize community tennis courts for our tennis program now. We use 4 courts at Rec Park and 2 courts at Memorial Park from the city of Raymore. Having courts of our own on campus might allow us to have more courts and certainly more access for both physical education and for our tennis programs. Operational costs of tennis courts are relatively low. You have to resurface them every 8 to 10 years, but in between that time are relatively inexpensive to have. At this point, I want to discuss with you how we would finance any facility improvements moving forward. And the most typical way to do that is through general obligation bonds, where the community votes on a bond issue, and that allows the district to borrow money up front to make the facility improvements and then pay for them over a period of 15 or 20 years through our debt service levy. The planning for this analysis that you're going to see coming forward is scenarios with a no levy increase in terms of our debt service levy. The district is limited in terms of how much money it can borrow. It's called our bonding capacity, and it's based on a percentage of our assessed valuation throughout the district. And then the other contributing factor is what can be paid for from an annual perspective through our debt service levy. So the interplay of both what we can borrow and what we can pay for with our current levy is included in this analysis. And I will also mention that we could include, besides just new construction, we can include maintenance projects or renovations in such bond issues. Okay, we've worked with our financial advisor to identify a couple of different scenarios just to give you a sense of what the bonding capacity and levy would currently support. You'll see in this analysis that in 2020 our net bonding capacity is over $63 million, and by next year, 2021, it would be over $71 million. We have a couple scenarios here that would say the earliest we would have a bond issue would be the spring of 2021. It could be any time after that, but just for analysis sake, we went with the earliest date period. Scenario 1 would say we could borrow $50 million in 2021, and then come back in 5 years later for a second phase for another $55 million, and then come back again 5 or 6 years later again for a third phase. The second scenario has a larger amount of borrowing in the first phase at $70 million, and then a second phase of $40 million, and then doing so more dollars up front. By the third phase, there would be bonding capacity available, but it couldn't be accomplished without increasing the levy at that point in time. District might have to wait 2 or 3 or 4 more years for that opportunity to come without increasing the levy. These are hypothetical scenarios. There are a lot of assumptions built into these numbers. These are all estimates based on conservative numbers that we would have at this point in time. But it gives you a sense of 2 different scenarios, one being a little more balanced approach where we would have the idea of every 5 or 6 years having another issue to address growth as we move forward. Or scenario 2 would be more front-loaded, trying to accomplish more projects up front with the idea that they're going to buy us as a more significant period of time, and then perhaps not have to come back as often in the future. So now we want to talk a little bit more detail about what some of these projects might cost when it relates to that bonding capacity and what those bond issues might look like in phases moving forward. The Capstone Career Center option that we discussed would serve about 200 students and would estimated cost of about $16 million to build a facility that would be of that size and programming level. A freshman center that would serve about 700 students would be in the neighborhood of $40 million, and a comprehensive high school that might serve 800 students would be in the neighborhood of $57 million. You might ask, where does the 700 student count come into play for the freshman center? Well, at that size, once it's getting close to full, the existing high school for grades 10 through 12 would also be getting close to full, which would require a subsequent phase for that facility to expand. Regardless of any of these options, these are all estimates. No design work has been done at this time. We're just trying to give you a concept of what some of these options might cost. At the elementary level, obviously, if we revise attendance boundaries of our existing schools, there's no real significant cost there. It's just a planning effort. If we go ahead and build an 8th elementary school sometime in the next 10 years, we're estimating the dollars for building a school the size of similar to our current elementary schools would be about $20 million. Some of those ancillary facilities, aquatic center, an 8-lane pool with a diving area similar to what Belton just built with their high school would be about $9 million. To build another grass athletic field for, say, sub-varsity practice or PE would be about $175,000 per field. A performing arts center, about 700 capacity, would be approximately $12 million. You could go larger than that, and if you do, you might have to consider doing a mezzanine to keep sight lines appropriate, in which case that would increase that cost significantly. Or tennis courts, an 8-court complex, they would cost about $100,000 per court or $800,000 total dollars. I appreciate the time you've given to hear all of this information. What we would ask that you do upon reflection of this information is identify how you would prioritize some of these issues that we've included in this presentation. You see the link here or the QR code for you to access the survey. It'll take you just a few minutes to share your priorities in terms of ranking each of these different areas of consideration. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact the district office. My name is Dr. Kerry Monses, or you can contact Dr. Brian Pettengill, Assistant Superintendent, who's helping with this process. We'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. Thank you for your time.